I've noticed over the past year that I've ended up falling into the gaping whirlpool of time sink that is the roguelike genre of games. I've had some previous experience in the form of brief time spent playing the original Binding of Isaac and my favorite song in the Metal Gear Solid 2 soundtrack, Dead Cells, and while both games are fun as hell, they never really ended up hooking me like they did to other people. However, this all changed when I ended up buying Risk of Rain 2 during the Steam Winter Sale of 2019 when the Hidden Realms update dropped. I was never the same again. There's something about the loop of gaining experience, learning strategies, dying, and starting a new run with new abilities and items that just feels really good when it's pulled off well. Thankfully, I haven't yet played a roguelike that makes this loop feel bad, and hopefully I never do. That being said, whenever one of these games enters my radar, I at least tend to keep an eye on them. One that particularly caught my attention for one reason or another was called Heart&Slash. I actually ended up buying it years ago. I played it for about an hour or two and inevitably let it collect dust in my Steam dungeon, as I tend to do with more games than I'd like to admit. However, I did pick it back up in April out of some sort of unconscious motivation. Curiosity? Waiting to give it the fair shake it properly deserved? Either way, I got hooked and ended up playing until I got all the unlockables that it had to offer. At the end of my time with Heart&Slash, I think I grew a bit of an attachment to this game. It's got problems of many different flavors, but my weird ass just ended up enjoying it. I think this game definitely deserves more credit, and maybe I'll convince you to check it out. Heart&Slash is the debut game made by A Heartful of Games, a studio based in Madrid. It initially began development in 2013 as a simple one-man project from lead developer Juan Regada Fernandez, who posted about its development on a game dev forum. It made steady progress, with Juan gradually recruiting more people to help work on the game until a Kickstarter campaign launched on Valentine's Day 2014. I get it. It made over 1.5 times its initial fund goal, and it got greenlit on Steam for an early access release in October of that same year. The game features the titular Heart as our main protagonist, a kawaii little robot dude who awakens to find the outside world overrun by hostile machines controlled by the cold and calculating Quasi? The quality assurance system. But Heart is a good little robot who isn't under Quasi's little spell, so it decides to venture out and seek the man who created him, just so it can find love and appreciation in this loveless world. But is such a thing possible? I don't know, beat up some toasters with a frying pan and find out. But of course, not everything is as it seems, and who is that edgelord standing all the way over there in the distance listening to My Chemical Romance? We'll talk about him later. His name is Slash, by the way. Heart&Slash is a 3D brawler with roguelike progression that draws inspiration from games like Mega Man Legends, The Binding of Isaac, and Bayonetta. Each run will have you going through room after room filled with hostile machines that simply want nothing more than to beat you up until you short circuit and explode. But despite your harmless looking name and design, you can find plenty of weapons and body parts scattered around that you can use to fight back. Weapons like swords, axes, and guns, or maybe a new body that can give you extra elemental resistances or let you dodge in midair. There's a lot of variety to be found here, but I'd sure hope so, since the game boasts having over 100 different pieces of equipment to unlock and find, along with 3 open, randomly generated levels and a persistent progression system. This sounds all well and good. It's got the makings of a fun game if you just want to sink some time into something and not think about much else, but sound doesn't equal game. Sound is simply a brick in the greater game wall. And I'm not talking about Pink Floyd, I'm talking about Heart&Slash. So the game uses a neat little blend of voxel-based models and sprite textures to make a visual style that feels somewhat reminiscent of a PS2 or a GameCube game, while not actually using any of the techniques or constraints that would go into making something that actually looks like a PS2 game. The designs and levels here just have that vibe, you know? They're all distinctly modeled with shapes and colors and design choices that really make some of these characters stand out. The titular characters are the best examples to me, with Heart having these rounded corners and lots of brightly colored lights and decals on its body, the large CRT monitor for a head displaying a pink pixel heart on a green background, and a large Roman numeral 2 on its chest that uses the same rainbow color pattern as the old Apple logo from the 90s, before they became minimalist corporate overlords. Heart's just really damn cute, you know? And on the complete other side of the spectrum, we have this edgy boy. Literally, he's taller, lankier, darker, and he's got so many unnecessary spikes just all over the place. Slash is like an edgy 14-year-old's PC running Windows XP with a Slipknot wallpaper just suddenly grew arms and legs. All he's really missing is that Slipknot wallpaper. Really, just about every character and enemy model looks unique and full of personality, even down to their animations. The big grunt enemies are as wide as sea land and they lumber around as slow as you'd expect, and the small bots have this exaggerated running animation that makes it look like their lunch break is almost over. And if you pay enough attention to the models, you notice that quite a solid number of these machines were just built for job automation and architecture, but they were given a more lethal purpose from Quasi's murderous intent. The in-game model viewer emphasizes this further, like how the utility bots used to clean floors, or how the combat tripods were made for construction. It's these small bits of lore that really make you realize just how much effort was put into the finer details. And while there are only 3 levels to run around in, they're all visually distinct with some interesting level design. You start in the factory, which is a pretty big indoor area filled with a lot of smaller rooms and hallways that end up covering quite a lot of horizontal space on your map. It's not the most memorable looking place, what with most of the possible room layouts being small to medium-sized arenas that'll typically spawn upwards of half a dozen walkie boys with a couple flying lads for variety. But there are at least some rooms that'll show up on occasion that break up the monotony, along with some minor lighting and texture variations. Then, depending on which path you get to take, you'll enter either the city or the sewers. Wait a minute, this isn't my bit. However, these are not 2 separate levels. Instead, they're 2 larger interconnected areas that can be accessed by these subway staircases placed throughout the map. The city is probably my favorite area in regards to general level design and aesthetic, since a lot of the rooms you go through are huge, sprawling, and having a lot to explore on just about every axis of movement. Not to mention these billboards and signs that range from intriguing to just plain adorable. The sewers, on the other hand, is kind of similar to the factory, but with less going on and all consisting of green and brown. It's not badly designed in itself, but the city definitely stands above it. Literally. And finally, you enter the Sky Elevator, which is one big vertical level divided by a bunch of floating platforms, storage containers, and smaller rooms that all climb up into the atmosphere. I really like this level because of how much of a spectacle it can be. Like, you can see this 96p looking city below you at first, but once you get to about halfway through the level, the clouds suddenly rush past you and now, whoosh, you're in space now. It's just really sick, and I kind of really like it. But ultimately, while the levels do look neat, it's mainly the randomly generated layouts that have to carry it, which unfortunately isn't always great. Dead ends are to be expected, of course, and since the game tells you that the goal is to simply reach the boss rather than to fill out your map, it does kind of feel like that's more of a consequence of its randomly generated nature rather than the goal of it. And since there is no method of fast travel between areas either, if you're stuck at a dead end and the next unexplored rooms are pretty far away from you, then you're gonna have to run all the way over there. On that note, Heart&Slash is a bit faster than you might expect from a game like this. It doesn't get as crazy as high-level Hades or Risk of Rain 2 or anything, but you'll find yourself running around and bashing bots while picking up and upgrading new pieces of equipment to prepare for the boss at the end of the level. It's a very simple gameplay loop that keeps you engaged early on with the help of the equally easy-to-handle control scheme. You can run, jump, double jump, dodge roll, and sprint. Those are your primary movement options, and they work pretty well. The jump can be a bit odd since the camera will just kind of zoom out and tilt downward each time you jump, and you kind of float at the apex of your height a bit, but I got used to it, and it's far from the worst jump I've used in a video game. The sprint is also kind of interesting since you move really fast during it, but your turning is also much slower. And if you jump during a sprint, you'll do a long jump that can be chained into a series of bunny hops. The downside being, if you bump into a wall while bunny hopping, Heart will just totally eat shit Tony Hawk style and tumble onto the ground for a few seconds. That's about all the depth that the base movement has at its core, but things start to get a bit more interesting with combat. You can have up to 3 weapons at once, the one in your middle being your primary and the other 2 being secondary weapons that you can switch to on the fly. But the cool part is that you switch weapons by holding down the left or right bumper on a gamepad. Think the Angel and Devil weapon system in DMC Devil May Cry, but you can assign nearly any weapon to these 3 slots. For instance, I typically like to have a faster hitting weapon as my primary, with slower weapons on the right bumper and projectiles or shields on the left. It's a neat little mechanic that I honestly haven't seen much in action games, at least to my knowledge. Weapons themselves work with a classic light attack, heavy attack system that you see in a lot of action games. The light attack is your main combo button, while the heavy attack typically works as a launcher or a heavy combo. The light combo can be strung into the heavy attack as a finisher, and you can do the same while in the air. It doesn't get any more complex than that, which is both to its benefit and detriment to some. The combat itself slaps, but if you're hoping for some sick Bayonetta combo strings and hidden tech, you're probably not going to be getting much of those. But as I mentioned before, the draw of the game comes from having the large amount of weapons and body parts to find and use against Quasi's army of tin cans. There's over 100 items in total to unlock, each with their own interesting abilities and uses. You've got swords, axes, guns, and some other peculiar things. And you also have body parts that can offer bonuses like letting you see enemy health bars, the ability to air dodge, or even giving you special attacks. There's a lot to find and experiment with, and most weapons feel pretty nice to use. I'm personally fond of the swords because I'm a wee bit denial and there's just a whole lot of them to use, but another favorite weapon I really like to see is this electric guitar. It acts kind of like a lightning axe, but you can upgrade it to have what's basically a massive screen nuke that sends all the enemies around you flying. It just feels really, really nice. However, this also brings up the issue of balance that can be rather inherent to roguelikes, which is also an issue that Heart&Slash especially struggles with. Some weapons and parts like the electric guitar with the screen nuke or the mecha armor set that gives you the air dodge and the big dick stat increases are just straight up better than a lot of other items, and some items are just very weird to use or even downright broken in some cases. Like these guns, for example. They're supposed to put you in a first-person aiming mode, but they often just bug out and keep you in third person, which just makes them a big old goddamn pain to use, so I just tend to not. Anyways, I mentioned upgrades earlier, and those are really, really important. As you stack up kills, you'll notice this display at the top right fill up. This is basically your experience points. You get enough to fill up the display, you accumulate upgrade points that you can pump into your weapons and body parts. You'll need a certain number of them to unlock certain upgrades, like needing at least 2 points to upgrade Heart's base functions like increasing its movement speed or jump height, or you'll need at least 1 point to make your sword swing faster or hit harder, to just name off a couple examples. And if you die or finish a run with unspent upgrade points, you'll start the next run with those points carried over, which is a really, really nice and wise feature that mitigates some of the grind. You're also given the option to recycle items you don't need into health. Since health drops aren't super common, you're probably going to be relying on recycling to top your health up. The amount of health restored depends on the item and how many crates of gears you've dumped onto them, which is always shown directly to you. But even if you're already at full health, it's still a good idea to recycle, because as long as you're not at the hard cap, recycling items while at full health will add an extra heart to your total, but it's always just 1 heart no matter how much the item would restore, so don't expect to suddenly gain 5 or 6 hearts from munching on that fancy suit you've been holding onto for the past level. I really like both of these systems. They're simple and pretty well executed, and they give a pretty solid sense of progression with each upgrade you purchase. But there is one part that's really, really poorly thought out in regards to the upgrade system. So, every upgrade has these somewhat comical descriptions that tell you what the upgrade does. At least, that's the idea. Some of these descriptions are confusing at best and just completely obtuse at worst. Like, what is any of this supposed to mean? Like, modulate gravity waves? What, the only modulating I know about is in Crisis Core and Ableton. Oh, wait, this lets me slow my falling speed by holding down the jump button. Okay, nice, that's kind of useful. Why can't you just tell me that's what it does instead of talking like this is advanced physics? And, unskippable cutscenes. Well, wait, no, some cutscenes are skippable, like the short transition where you enter a boss room, but the cutscene that plays when you actually approach the boss is unskippable, so, like, why? The tutorial is probably the worst offender for this, because while you can mash your way past most of the dialogue, there's just so much text. But hey, it's just a tutorial. Why would you want to worry about trying to go through that a bunch of times? Man. But hey, we also have extra characters to unlock. But 2 of them are basically reskins without a lot of differences. One of them is buggy and just kind of feels like an unfinished afterthought. I guess Robnin is kind of neat. Okay, look, I promise I really like this game, but there are some choices here that are just baffling, even for a low-budget indie title. Like, I don't like being mean, I'm just being honest. Okay, let's chill. There is a plausible explanation to some of the lack of polish here. Stuff probably just had to be cut, or at the very least trimmed down and left unfinished in order to finish the game up within development time and budget. Aside from the bugs and the grammatical errors in the script, the Kickstarter does mention some ideas and features that certainly seem different or straight up absent from the final product, though it's mainly on the story side of things. It sounded like there was going to be a lot more emphasis on the overarching story between our titular characters, with Heart trying to catch Slash's attention and trying to impress him, with Heart growing and learning how to express its desire for love and identity. It even sounded like there'd be different endings depending on what kind of relationship you pursued with Slash, but in the final game, it's all just a single, static questline that doesn't offer any forks in the road at all. Honestly, reading up on this after beating the game, it kind of feels like Juan didn't get to tell the story he was wanting to tell. He wanted to make a game about love and all of its highs and lows, but the romance that's in the finished product doesn't really feel like a romance as much as it feels like 2 people standing up for each other to fight injustice, which is a story that definitely has its right to exist, but the only thing that feels remotely like love is the very end, which I won't spoil because it's a really sweet scene, but it also just does feel a bit underwhelming. I know there must have been more things planned to be added and expanded upon, but for one reason or another, those concepts just didn't turn out the way they should have, or they didn't even turn out at all, which really is the grim reality of game development. Things are in constant flux. Something could get added or proposed only to be removed within 2 months or 2 years of development for a multitude of potential reasons. It sucks, but it really do say la be like that. At the very least, the sound in this game is fine. It's not bad, but it's probably not going to catch your ear at all either. Sometimes it can be a bit underwhelming and poorly mixed, especially if you don't change the audio settings. I found that the music is way louder than the sound effects by default, to the point where it just kind of felt drowned out to me, so I would personally recommend turning the music down to about like 50 or 60%. But then again, the music is probably one of the best things about this entire video game. Composer Michael Chait, God, I hope I'm saying that right, is a damn good musician. He captures this bright, energetic, and upbeat tone by blending funky rhythms and bass guitars with these bright synthesizer leads, chromatic piano melodies, and snappy percussion. He even got my main man R-Dub on here. Man, what a legend. Hope he's doing well. I'm not one to listen to a lot of video game music on its own anymore, but I can definitely see a lot of people vibing with this kind of style. Like, some of these songs just stand up on their own too. Like, I'd try dancing to I Heart You and City Street Funk if I wasn't a dumbass white-ass deer boy. Really, this is just a damn solid soundtrack, man. It's a shame, because Mike just kind of disappeared after putting this out. His website's gone, his Twitter's gone, no remaining activity on social media that I could find. Like, I hope the guy's alright, because, again, he's really good at what he does. Well, let's move back to sound design. Again, sound effects are fine, but they can be pretty quiet and underwhelming, since I've noticed that they're mixed depending on the distance between the camera and the action. Particularly the sounds relating to general movement, a lot of it is just very soft and gets drowned out by the music and hit sounds. Running, jumping, dodging, it's all very quiet and clicky and lacking in weight and responsiveness to me. Attacks sound pretty good for the most part. The distinct, beefy explosions you hear when an enemy is weak to a certain weapon versus the pitiful scrapes when it's resistant to that element clues you in pretty well. They're mixed clearly, if not a bit on the louder side at times, I'll even admit, but it's far from the worst. This is fine sound design. I could give it a bit of leeway considering the super low budget that the team had to work with, although I am curious to see what they would have done with a bit more time and a bit more money. Or hell, I wonder what these guys would even do with a sequel. Okay, so I think the amount of items could be scaled back since the first game does suffer from bloat and balancing issues. Cut the arsenal down to about like half from the first game and focus on having more of a diverse cast of weapons and parts. Adding a few more combo paths for each weapon would probably encourage players to experiment further, kind of like how Bayonetta does it, you know? I think adding more personal upgrades and modifiers could be fun as well. Like, you do get permanent health and stat increases in the first game, but they don't really make you feel stronger with each run. You're very item dependent. Like, a fun idea could be implementing like a kind of perk system where during a run you could select a handful of perks that affect how you play. Like, maybe one can temporarily increase your attack speed with every enemy you kill, or maybe one of them could let you have a second weapon loadout that you can swap between with the press of a button. Like, having unlocks like these that aren't just plain stat increases could add a lot more potential to experiment and play with builds, which is some of the best fun you could have in a roguelike, really. And having a slightly larger cast of characters and expanding the lore a bit would be really nice as well, I think. There are these 3 particular characters advertised in the Kickstarter called the Roaming Rebel Rogues. They look like they could have added some more depth to the world and to Heart's character development. And of course, expanding on Heart's relationship with Slash and putting a bit more focus on that initial concept of trying to woo him through your choices and actions, that would be nice. And also just focusing on sanding down those rougher edges from the first game and learning from those lacking aspects to better improve on them. Like, better sound design, clearer user interface, less confusing flavor text, stuff like that. There's a ton of potential in here from the first game that could be expanded on in so many interesting and creative ways. It's just like, I need water. Water break. Okay. I don't want to tell people how to do their jobs or turn this into a video where I'm saying, a heart full of games, please hire this man, because that's not what this is about. I just like talking about weird, janky games with interesting ideas and devoted developers behind them. And that's what Heart&Slash is. Far, far and away from perfect. It's frustrating and empty in some areas, but it's put together completely competently and it's oozing with charm. Juan and the rest of the gang at A Heart Full of Games clearly have a deep passion for video games of all origins and audiences, and for a team's first commercially available game, it honestly stands up better than some other notable Kickstarter-funded games. And as of publishing this video, they're currently producing their next project, a 3D turn-based tactics game called Iron Skins, which definitely sounds promising to me. Got some mech warrior and front mission vibes with the concept art that's been shared. I fuck with it quite a bit, yes I do. And I ultimately realized that I probably spent a lot of time just talking about this game's shortcomings, but I feel like I kind of need to put this sort of stuff up front. If I'm not honest, and if I just blow smoke up your ass and say, oh yeah, this game is pretty epic, play it, wow, then there's the chance you'll feel let down and falsely advertised to, which is just a really shitty thing to do. So yeah, Heart&Slash has some flaws that may stop you from really vibing with it. Sitting down to play it, especially during your first initial runs, it could feel like a bit of a chore, especially if you just want to progress through the story. It's got some of that trademark indie jank, you know? But looking past that jank, or even sometimes because of it, there's a lot of charm and really cool stuff to find here. The silent post-apocalyptic environments and the different kinds of robots in the various states of disrepair, the voxel-modeled weapons and their uniquely crafted logos. This game is just really freaking neat. And I hope you're able to see all of the heart put into this game as much as I can. At the very least, the sound in this... bit my tongue.